Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another 4 p.m. Bible study. My name is Jim Schaefer, and I share with you every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Now, I'm a retired pastor and Bible teacher, and it is my joy to share with you the message of Jesus Christ. We have recently started a brand new series entitled Divine Disruption. We looked in our last lesson at how the birth of Jesus Christ disrupted the Roman Empire. Now, King Herod, his life went quickly downhill after ordering the massacre of all of the male children in Bethlehem. The slaughter of the infant boys vividly reflects the pathological character of this king. Remember, Herod had even killed members of his own family, while at the same time he was scrupulously observing the Mosaic dietary laws and he refused to eat pork. I recently read that the Roman Emperor Augustus had said concerning Herod, "I would rather be Herod's pig than Herod's son." This is quite an amusing look at this strange man. Now, Herod's final years were marked by a chronic kidney disease, complicated by a very uncomfortable case of maggot infested gangrene of the genitals. It was a tragic end to a very tragic life. Now, in today's lesson, I want to kind of shift gears, and rather than looking at the disruption on the Roman Empire, I want to focus on the disruption of the Jewish people. In particular, I want to focus on the disruption that the birth of Jesus Christ had among the Jewish leaders. Let's take a quick gander at who has joined us here today. Perhaps you're watching this after the fact, either on Facebook or on my YouTube channel. However it is that you got here, let me welcome you and thank you for being here. Now, we do broadcast this live on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. So let's take a quick gander and see if any people have joined us here today. See a couple of comments. YouTube channel, however it is that you got. I see that. Thank you. All right, we'll get rid of the volume here. I see that we have Robin Sharkey and Debbie Tafel that are both watching. Welcome, guys. I'm glad that you're here. I know others will join us and perhaps have already done so. So let's begin by looking at this idea of the disruption that is being caused to the Jewish people. Now, let's remember that the Jewish people were the chosen people of God. They had a special covenant and a special relationship with God. They had a very rich and complex history, culture, and religion that was based upon the life of Moses and the writing of the prophets and the tradition of the elders. As a group, these people suffered a lot. They were enslaved, they were exiled, they were oppressed by various foreign powers, such as the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Greeks, and eventually the Romans. They were longingly awaiting for the coming of the Messiah, the one who would liberate them from their enemies and restore to them the glory and the dignity that they believed they possessed as God's people. From the final book of the Old Testament until the birth of Christ, there was a period of 400 years. Now, this is often referred to as the 400 years of silence. And one of the reasons that it is referred to as the 400 years of silence is because we have no prophet. We have no one that is warning the people. So the last voice that we have in the Old Testament is a man by the name of Malachi. Now, Malachi had warned the Jewish people, but his words had fallen on deaf ears. The Jewish people were mistreating their wives, and they were marrying pagans, and they weren't tithing, and the priests were neglecting the temple and not teaching the people the ways of God. In short, the Jews weren't honoring God. No great surprise, because this has been really what the Jewish people had been all about. But the book of Malachi emphasizes the need for a divine intervention, a restoration, and it even looks forward to the Messiah's coming and the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies. Now, in the book of Malachi, we have these words. In Malachi chapter 3, it says, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Who could this be? Who could be the one that is going to prepare the way of the Lord? If you got any idea, take a moment to respond in the comments if you would. Who could this possibly be? Malachi says that God says, I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Well, I think you've all figured out that that is a reference to John the Baptist. John the Baptist is the one who is going to be the messenger. He is the one who is going to announce his presence. And so we have this portrayed in the book of Malachi all the way back in the Old Testament. But there's a second line there. Do you notice it says, then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple. Who is this? This is none other than Jesus Christ himself. Jesus is going to come to his temple according to the book of Malachi. Now, remember this phrase because this is going to be really important as we move into this study. I want to show you very quickly a chart that I think will help you to grasp exactly what is taking place here. This chart I pulled up from Mark and Jackie's Photos.com, but it presents to you all of the world powers from the time of Daniel until the time of Christ. Now, again, this is just a quick overview. But if you remember, Daniel and the nation of Israel was overthrown by the Babylonians. The Jewish temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed. Following the Babylonians, the Persians will come to power. This was King Cyrus, and Cyrus had permitted the Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the city, to rebuild the walls, to rebuild the temple. Following the Persian rule, we have the period of time of the Greeks. Now, the Greeks were led by Alexander the Great, and upon his death, the kingdom was divided into four sections. And during this period of time, there was continual conflict between the Greeks and those that were surrounding them, including the nation of Israel. The Hasmonean period is the next period. And this is the period of time where Jacob Maccabees is going to come to power and attempt to restore Jerusalem. Following this period is the Roman period. That's the period in which Jesus is going to be born. So, let's go ahead and dig into this a little deeper. Now, this is a little bit complicated. I just ask you to bear with me because I think it's important for us to understand the dynamics and what is taking place here. It was 333 BC, and Israel had fallen to the Greeks. In 323, it fell to the Egyptians. And again, this is a back and forth type of thing. One country will take over and then the next and back and forth. Now, the Jews generally were treated very well through these various reigns. And they adopted the Greek language and many of the Greek customs and manners. And in Egypt, the Old Testament was translated into Greek, and that translation we know as the Septuagint, and it came into widespread use, and that's going to be the New Testament, or I'm sorry, the Old Testament in the New Testament period, all right, during the time of Christ. Now, the Jewish laws and the priesthood is going to remain more or less intact until Antiochus the Great of Syria captures Israel in 204 BC. He and his successor, Antiochus Epiphanes, they persecuted the Jews. And in particular, Antiochus Epiphanes sold the priesthood. And in 171 BC, he actually will enter into the Jewish temple and into the Holy of Holies, and he will sacrifice a pig upon the altar. Many believe that Antiochus Epiphanes was a type of Antichrist, and that the Antichrist will do the same thing when he comes to power. Now, this desecration of the temple is what caused Judas Maccabees and his sons to rise up in revolt, and this became the Hasmonean period. In 165, the Jews recaptured Jerusalem. They cleansed the temple. However, fighting continued between the Jews and the Syrians until the Romans showed up on the scene. And in 63 BC, approximately 61 years prior to the birth of Christ, at which time Pompey walked once again into the Jewish temple and into the Holy of Holies, once again shocking and embittering the Jewish people. In 47 BC, Caesar Augustus installed Antipater. We'll get that pronunciation right. He was a descendant of Esau, and he became the procurator of Judea. And Antipater subsequently appointed his two sons as kings over Galilee and Judea. And Herod the Great was one of those sons. So that kind of brings us up to the period of Christ's birth. Now, in spite of all of this history and this apostasy, this refusal of the Jewish people to obey the Old Testament prophets, there were many, many Jews that continued to pray for a Messiah. The birth of Jesus Christ was the fulfillment of their hopes and their expectations, as he was the Messiah that God had promised throughout the Old Testament. He was born of a virgin, as Isaiah had prophesied in Isaiah 7:14. He was conceived by the Holy Spirit. He was announced by the angel Gabriel to Mary. He was born under the law as a son of Abraham and as a son of David. And he was circumcised on the 8th day, according to the Jewish custom. He was the ultimate revelation of God's love and grace. As John 1:14 says, the Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ will go on to cause great division and controversy among the Jewish people. He wasn't the kind of Messiah that they had expected or that they had even wanted. Many of them were looking for a political or a military leader. And when you look at the history of all that's taken place, you can see why they would desire this kind of military leader. They were looking for someone who would overthrow the Romans and establish an earthly kingdom. The first century Israelites were waiting for a new Moses to appear and to lead a new exodus, not out of Egypt this time, but out of the Roman Empire. This figure, they believed, would be the Messiah. Now, we need to understand that while they rejected Jesus Christ and they refused to acknowledge that he was the Messiah, it was because he didn't fit their criteria or their agenda. They rejected his teachings, his miracles, his claims, and his authority. And then they accused him of blasphemy and of breaking the law and of being a sinner and being possessed by a demon and being a friend of tax collectors and sinners. They plotted against him, and eventually they handed him over to the Romans to be crucified. However, there were some that believed. Shepherds had worshiped him at his birth. Angels had rejoiced in the heaven at his appearing. The Magi presented him with gifts worthy of a king: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. A virgin mother had obeyed God and embraced her role in bringing up the Messiah into the world. Joseph had swallowed his pride, and he had faithfully walked alongside his wife. There were others. There were relatives like Elizabeth and Zachariah, his cousin John the Baptist, his disciples, and of course, many, many others. They were the ones who had witnessed and testified to his birth, his life, his death, and even his resurrection. They were the ones who had received the Holy Spirit and became the first members of the first church, the new people of God. They were the ones who had spread the good news of Jesus Christ to the ends of the earth, and they were the ones who were willing to die because they believed so strongly in him. They went and they discipled all nations. In bringing this lesson to a close, though, I want to look at an event that happened just 8 days prior to the birth, 8 days following the birth of Christ. We find this story in the book of Luke, chapter 2, starting with verse 22. I want you to keep in mind the words that we read from Malachi. Here's the text. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Mary and Joseph took him, that's Jesus, to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Now, there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon, who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was on him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. When the parents brought in the child, Jesus, to do for him what the custom of the law required, Simeon took him in his arms, praising God, and said, sorry about that, "Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for the revelation to the Gentiles, and glory to your people, Israel." The Lord had suddenly come into his temple, as Malachi had stated. But the story's not over. It says the child's father and mother marveled at what was said about him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, "This child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too." Sounds like a disruption to me. How about you? And then we read, there was also a prophet, Anna, the daughter of Penuel, the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage and then was a widow until she was 84. Some believe that that actually should read, she had been a widow for 84 years. That would place her at 91. She never left the temple but worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Israel. So here we have in the book of Luke the idea that the Lord had come into his temple. And he is met there by these two individuals that God had promised that they would see the Messiah. There's a lot of disruption to come, believe me. But we see at the very beginning of his life that everything is in place, that he is the Messiah who is going to change the world. We'll continue with this thought in our next video. I hope you will join us then. It will take place on Tuesday of next week. Again, let me encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to go to the YouTube channel. Its address is on the screen there. Like the video there as well, and subscribe to the page. It really helps to spread this word. The YouTube channel is growing every single day, and I thank you for that. I hope you'll take time to go there, take just a few minutes of your time to help further this ministry. I want to thank you again for watching and for being with us. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all on Tuesday. God bless.